So we've taken an interest in what we call the active wealth households because of the impact they have, not only in the financial sector, but really across many vertical markets, whether it's luxury goods, travel, philanthropy, what have you. Their impact is pretty substantial. In our Global Wealth Monitor, we look at the active wealth as those that are highly engaged in putting their wealth in motion. So it's really, think about money in motion, people that are highly active investors, moving money around, transferring money, buying, selling, or what have you. Specifically, we define the active wealth as those who intend to add money to at least 5 or more financial products or are very likely to invest in 3 or more products in the next 6 months. So again, individuals that are very active in putting their wealth in motion. But to really understand the millennials, you have to understand the gestalt, and this is sort of the collection of physical, psychological, or biological elements that together collectively are greater than the sum of the parts. It's really what the essence of this group is. And it's really, when you're talking about the millennials or any generation, it's instructive to consider the events that have defined their perspective. And for the millennials, it's pretty impressive. So this is sort of a montage of all of the events in their relatively short lives that have impacted their perspective, ranging at the top of the slide from the dot-com meltdown in 2000, 9/11, of course, environmental disruption, the mobile technology revolution, which continues to just increase year by year. Globalization has taken off in the last 20 or 30 years. Of course, the Great Recession of 2008-09 has definitely impacted this generation. Social media. And a few years ago, who even heard of Twitter? And now, Twitter is out there. I learned the other day Twitter's actually going to put little buy buttons on their Twitter feeds, so you can actually purchase goods or services through Twitter at some point. Facebook's doing the same thing. Diversity, of course, as I mentioned, is another hallmark of the generation. The debt reduction, post-crisis deleveraging of debt, and the difficulty that many of this generation have in getting credit. So the list goes on and on. From our research, we see 4 forces that have profoundly shaped the values that active wealth millennials bring to their financial affairs and money management in particular. So these 4 forces, I think, are a thread that runs through a lot of the, not only research that you see, but of stories about millennials, how they live, how they breathe. So let's take a look very briefly at what they are, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. The first is access. And it's really, access is really built into their DNA. They've come of age with the rapid technological forces, the social media. So having access, instant access to everything is one of their sort of core beliefs, core needs. So let's first talk about access. And when we talk about access, we really mean access to data, to people, to expertise, to products and services. It's really ubiquitous access that's woven into the DNA of millennials. And a couple of quotes that I think are indeed emblematic of access and their need for information. Here's one. If I need information or to connect with people or information or products, I just expect that it's available to me now. Another quote that I thought was also apropos: don't give me an annual report, don't give me a quarterly report, and don't mail it to me ever. If I need a report, I'll ask for it. Very, very, very typical of the millennial generation. Instant access, instant demand for information. To be clear, the use of social networking in managing finances is really still in its infancy. Our latest data for those that are utilizing social networking and managing finances or investments, only 2% of boomers are doing that. About 8% of Gen X are likewise doing that. The active wealth have indeed started to become active in managing and using social networking for investments or finances, 28% versus 14% for the less active. So again, these active wealth are the proverbial canary, in terms of being sort of the leading barometer, if you will, of what's going to happen in financial services over the next few years. So our second force, as I mentioned, that are shaping millennials is something we call taking control. And we spent a lot of time looking at the impact of the Great Recession and the outcomes of many affluent and high net worth investors. And taking control was really their response to advisors who kind of dropped the ball during the recession. They either weren't, they weren't doing their job, the advisors weren't doing their job in terms of communicating with the affluent household, or for whatever reason, these affluent decided that they really needed to step in and be more involved in their financial affairs. Well, this, for the active wealth millennials in general, is an outgrowth of the Great Recession, but I think it's also sort of part and parcel of who they are as a generation. But definitely the active wealth millennial want more say in how their money is managed. I mean, that is, without question, a very, very strong need for the millennials. We've been monitoring this attitude statement for some time, going back to the Great Recession, and that is, I need to take much more control over my investment decisions. About 22% of boomers, 37% of Gen X, but 2/3 of active wealth households have a strong belief that they need to take more control. So, just some, hard evidence that indeed that's important to them. You can kind of interpret control in many different ways. I think from this perspective, it's more about being highly involved in the decision making, being more of having a say in how their money is diversified, how it's allocated, having a back and forth, and being involved also in the learning process. Millennials, from the control perspective, want a say, want to do a lot of their own education. They're not going to turn to their advisor necessarily and say, please educate me, Mr. or Mrs. Advisor. They're going to go out and do it themselves, right, Jake? So, Jake is our representative millennial, and he'll be on the panel. But Jake and I, Jake and I talk a lot about this issue of control, and you can interpret it in many ways. But I think in general, it's all about having their own ability to make decisions and use information, because they're going to go out and verify the information that you as an advisor provide to them. They're not going to take it at face value. This other data point that I put out, making their own investment decisions, but using an advisor for specialized needs, that is sort of the validator model, because we split that advice orientation into 4 buckets: self-directed, special events or specialized needs, which 40% of the active wealth fall into, and then we have the advisor collaboration and the advisor directed. So those are the 4 buckets. But indeed, the active wealth millennials strongly fall into that validator. Active wealth millennials temper their risk taking through financial planning, and I think this is such an important point. As I mentioned, the active wealth millennials and millennials in general are risk takers. 70% are willing to take calculated risk when investing. So, they've gotten to where they are through their risk taking, but, an important point, and this other data point, is that the importance they attach to having a financial plan at 68% is really, I think, very, I think they need to be applauded for having that interest in financial planning, because what that does is it gives them some grounding. It really, kind of brings some perspective to their financial affairs, and it allows them to say, hey, I'm willing to take risk, but I've got a strong financial plan behind me. So again, having that interest in control extends to that importance they attach to having a financial plan. This is another data point from our Global Wealth Monitor, and the attitude here is I would follow my advisor if he or she moved to another firm. boomers at about 55%. I remember my financial advisor about 10 years ago switched firms. There's no question in my mind I was going to follow him. I was like, okay, because my loyalty was attached to the advisor. But if you look at the active wealth millennials at 12%, it's really about loyalty to the brand. And if you look at a lot of the literature out there, you keep seeing it over and over again. It's all about attachment to the brand and how the brand speaks to them.
What percentage are actually working with a financial planner?
All right, here's your answer. But the first part of the slide just looks at the use of having a use of primary professional advisor and the channels that they use. So if you can read the stats, about 21% of active wealth millennials have a full service broker as their primary advisor. That's way lower than, let's say, the boomers, who are up around 37, 38%. Other channels online at 9%, accounting at 7%, a banker at 12%, which is pretty high, but not unexpected since the millennials start, for the most part, their financial lives with a bank attachment. Independents at 8%. So this part of the slide again speaks to that diversity. They're not willing to just sort of go along with the full service broker mentality. They want to choose what they want to choose. So the other part of the stat is that 39% of the active wealth don't have a professional advisor, a primary professional advisor or advisor they consider to be professional, and 62% would consider using a robo-advisor. So another hallmark of their diversity. And I mentioned the sharing economy. The peer-to-peer networks has really strongly given rise to the sharing economy, and we've all heard about some of the sort of the standard bearers. Lyft, which is peer-to-peer ride sharing, Airbnb in lodging. You might not have heard about Skillshare, but Skillshare basically is sharing learning. So if you've got a skill that you want to impart to others, you can use this platform to share your skill on a peer-to-peer basis. TaskRabbit, which is outsourcing small jobs and tasks, and our good friend Frank from Ameriprise turned me on to this co-housing. This is collaborative housing within a defined neighborhood. So it's really not necessarily sharing living space, but it's more about sharing services and others within a sort of I hate to call it a commune. That's dating, right? But I think it's more about just using resources to your advantage. And that's really what about the sharing economy is. It's using resources to your advantage, whether it's ride sharing or lodging or what have you. The last force that I wanted to mention is global consciousness. And as I mentioned, the millennials are really, truly the first global generation. And then I view the world as my platform for investing. So many millennials do indeed have an interest in global, a global perspective on their portfolios. If you look at the stats, many of the active wealth have very strong allocations in foreign bonds, foreign equities, global equities, etc. So they are definitely global in orientation. It also gets back to the diversity issue. They want to diversify not only domestically but also globally. You've got to continue to engage the millennials after the sale, and that's so important. You might engage them, a boomer during the sale, prior to the sale, but for the most part, a lot of companies say, all right, thank you very much, on to the next. It's not going to work with millennials. You really got to keep them engaged because they're going to talk to you, to their peers about you, years after the sale is made.